90 Days with a Billionaire. I wasn't supposed to love him until I did. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Today's story is titled 90 Days with a Billionaire. I wasn't supposed to love him until I did. It started with a deal, not a proposal. On a cold Tuesday night in Manhattan, the city lights reflected off the rain-slicked glass walls of a penthouse office. Inside, Lena Hart sat trembling, in a worn gray coat, clutching a file of unpaid hospital bills. Across the massive desk sat Alexander Reed, the man whose name was whispered in every business headline, the elusive billionaire who built Reed Dynamics from nothing. He looked at her the way a lawyer studies a contract. Calm, detached, assessing. 90 days, he said, sliding a crisp document toward her. You'll live with me. Attend events as my wife. And after the agreement expires, you'll walk away with $250,000. His tone was colder than the glass between them. Lena blinked, certain she'd misheard. Excuse me? You're what? My wife, he repeated, every word measured. A temporary one. Her pulse quickened. Why me? He leaned back, eyes unreadable. Because you need this. And because I don't have time for anyone who does it. For love. Outside, thunder rolled. Lena's stomach twisted. 3 months. That was all he asked. 90 days that could pay for her mother's surgery, save their apartment, and maybe, just maybe, buy her another chance at life. She glanced at the pen resting by the contract, the ink shining under the lamp. There has to be a catch, she whispered. Alexander's lips curved, not into a smile, but something like one. There is. Rule number 1. Don't fall in love with me. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain outside. She should have run. Every instinct told her this was madness. But desperation has its own logic. With a shaky breath, Lena signed her name. The pen left a small tremor in the signature, a heartbeat on paper. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, extending a hand that felt like an order. Welcome to the agreement, Mrs. Reed. The sound of her new name hit harder than she expected. That night, as the elevator doors closed behind her, Lena stared at her reflection, cheap coat, tired eyes, and a ring that wasn't hers yet gleaming on her finger. 90 days, she told herself. Just 90 days. But as the city spread beneath her like a constellation of chances and regrets, she didn't know those 90 days would become the longest and most unforgettable season of her life. It wasn't supposed to be love. It was supposed to be survival. Yet, fate had already signed a contract of its own. The morning after signing the contract, Lena woke up in a place that looked nothing like her world. Alexander's penthouse towered above the skyline, walls of glass letting sunlight pour across polished marble floors. Every corner gleamed with quiet wealth. From the grand piano, no one played to the fresh white lilies arranged by staff before dawn. Lena stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee she was too nervous to drink. She had promised herself this was just a job, but nothing about it felt simple. The reflections staring back at her in the glass looked like someone else. A woman wearing a silk robe that wasn't hers. A diamond ring that didn't belong on her hand. Behind her, a door opened. You are up early, Alexander said, his voice as smooth as the espresso he was pouring. He was dressed already, tie in place, precision in every movement. She turned, forcing a polite smile. I could not sleep much. Too many thoughts. He nodded slightly. That is understandable. Our first appearance together is tonight. She blinked. Appearance? At the Reed Foundation Gala. My board expects to see my wife. His tone made it sound less like an invitation and more like an obligation. She wanted to protest, but instead she nodded. What am I supposed to wear to something like that? He handed her a sleek black card. Whatever you want. My assistant will take you shopping at noon. When he left for work, silence filled the penthouse again. Lena stared at the credit card for a long time, feeling the weight of invisible chains. By evening, she stood at the top of a marble staircase, wearing a gown that shimmered like champagne under the chandelier. The air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, the scent of perfume and ambition. Beside her, Alexander looked effortless in his tailored tuxedo. Every time he smiled at the crowd, she remembered the first rule: do not fall in love. Cameras flashed. Hands reached for handshakes. When a journalist asked, "How long have you two been married?" Lena hesitated, her throat dry. Alexander placed a hand on her waist and answered smoothly, "Long enough to know that she is the better half." The gesture looked perfect, but his fingers rested like a warning. Stay in character. Hours later, when the lights dimmed and the orchestra softened, Lena slipped away to the balcony. The night air was cooler here, the city glowing like a sea of gold below. She whispered to herself, 90 days. You just have to survive. 90 days. Cold? A voice asked behind her. She turned. Alexander was holding out his jacket. She hesitated before taking it, the warmth of the fabric strangely human against her skin. You handled tonight well, he said. You almost sounded like a real wife. And you almost sounded like a real husband, she replied softly. For the first time, his smile wasn't rehearsed. Careful, Mrs. Reed. That almost sounded like affection. Do not worry, she said, eyes steady. I remember the rules. Good, he murmured, though something in his expression flickered something she could not name. Days passed like chapters in a book she hadn't agreed to read. Their mornings began with silent breakfasts, their afternoons with meetings, and rehearsed public appearances. Yet, behind the facade, small cracks began to show. He started leaving his office door open when she walked by. She began to make him laugh quietly, unexpectedly at things that were not supposed to be funny. One night, she found him asleep on the couch, a file still open on his chest. A man, worn down by success. She pulled a blanket over him without thinking, whispering, Good night, Mr. Reed. He stirred, eyes half open. Lena? She froze. Yes? Thank you, he murmured, and fell back asleep. In that moment, something inside her shifted. It was no longer just about money or survival. For the first time since signing that contract, she wondered what it would feel like if this was real. The following weeks turned into a strange rhythm between them, a silent dance of duty and curiosity. Each morning, Lena woke to the sound of Alexander's footsteps, echoing through the marble hallway as he left for his office. Each night, she waited for the familiar click of the elevator, bringing him home. They spoke in polite sentences, smiled for cameras, and maintained the illusion of perfection. Yet something invisible grew beneath the surface. One evening, Alexander returned later than usual, rain soaking his shoulders, and his tie loosened. Rough day? She asked carefully, setting aside the sketchbook she had begun keeping to fill the quiet hours. He glanced at her drawing, a portrait of the city at dusk, its lines soft but alive. You draw? He asked, surprise flickering across his usually composed face. She shrugged. It helps me breathe. For a long moment, he studied the page. You see beauty in things most people ignore, he said quietly, then walked away before she could answer. The next morning, she found an easel waiting in the corner of the living room with a note written in his clean, sharp handwriting. For when breathing gets hard. She smiled despite herself. Days later, at another charity dinner, the facade began to blur. A woman with red lipstick and too much perfume leaned in toward Alexander, laughing loudly. Lena caught fragments of their conversation, memories of old times, a business deal that sounded too personal. The woman's hand brushed his arm, and Lena's chest tightened with something that felt like jealousy. When Alexander noticed her expression, he excused himself from the woman and crossed the room. "You look pale," he said. "Too many cameras?" "Something like that," she replied, forcing a smile. "You did not have to save me." "Maybe I did," he said simply, eyes holding hers for a second too long. Later that night, as their car wound through the quiet streets, the air between them felt heavier than the silence outside. "That woman," Lena said, finally. "She seemed close to you." "She was," Alexander admitted. "But that was before this arrangement." She hesitated. "Before me." He nodded once. "Yes. Before you." Neither spoke again, but the words lingered long after the car stopped. The next morning, Lena found herself humming while making coffee, only to stop when she realized he was watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said with a faint smile. "You just seem more at home." She wanted to tell him that she was not, that she was still counting days like miles in a storm. But the words caught in her throat. That evening, he invited her to accompany him on a short trip to the countryside estate his company owned for private meetings. The drive was quiet, the sky painted in late summer gold. When they arrived, she stepped out into a world of open fields and still air. "You live in glass and steel," she said softly, "but this feels like where you can actually breathe." He looked at her, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "Maybe that is why I brought you here." They walked for hours, talking about everything except the contract that bound them. She learned he once wanted to be an architect, not a tycoon. He learned that her mother used to paint sunsets before her illness. As the sun began to sink, they stopped near a lake reflecting the fire-colored sky. Lena picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface. It jumped 3 times before sinking. "Not bad," Alexander said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Your turn," she challenged. He tried and failed miserably. For the first time, she laughed, real and unguarded. He looked at her as if he had never heard that sound before. "Do not get used to it," she teased. "It does not happen often." "Then I will take it as a victory," he replied. The golden light caught his profile, and something inside her shifted again. Quiet but certain. Maybe this was what danger looked like, not the threat of scandal or exposure, but the simple truth that she was beginning to care. That night, as they sat by the fire inside the cabin, the world outside faded to silence. Alexander poured her tea instead of wine, his gesture unspoken but tender. "You are different from anyone I have ever met," he said. She met his gaze across the flickering light. "So are you." Neither moved, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking another minute closer to the end of their 90 days, and for the first time, both of them wished time would stop. When they returned to the city, something between them had quietly changed. The air felt heavier, but warmer, the kind of warmth that sneaks in unnoticed. Lena found herself waiting for his voice in the evenings, the soft click of his shoes on the marble floor. Alexander, who once treated time like a weapon, began finding excuses to linger at breakfast or ask her opinion on things that did not need an answer. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the tall windows, Lena arranged a small vase of wildflowers she had bought from a street vendor. Alexander stopped mid-step, watching her. "You brought color into this house," he said quietly. "It was all gray before you." She looked at him, unsure if he meant the room or his life. But before she could ask, his phone rang, and the moment dissolved. The next day, he invited her to an annual charity gala, one far larger than the first they attended together. "It will be full of people who think they know everything about me," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Just smile, and let them believe what they want." That evening, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and whispers. Alexander stood tall, calm, but Lena could sense the tension beneath his surface. She had learned the rhythm of his silence, the way his jaw tightened when something bothered him. As the night went on, one of his rivals, a sleek man named Eric Vaughn, approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Alexander," Eric said, shaking his hand. "And this must be the famous wife everyone is talking about." Lena smiled politely. I am hardly famous. Not yet, Eric replied, leaning closer. Be careful, Mrs. Reed. Men like your husband collect people the way others collect art. Beautiful, but replaceable. The comment stung, but before she could respond, Alexander's hand tightened around hers. That is enough, Eric, he said in a low voice. Eric chuckled and walked away, leaving a trail of tension behind. Lena turned to Alexander. Was he telling the truth? She asked quietly. His eyes softened, but his words were sharp. Do not listen to people who measure everything in ownership. Still, the remark lingered in her chest. Later that night, after the gala, she stood on the balcony again, looking at the endless lights below. Alexander joined her, jacket in hand. Do not let people like him make you doubt yourself, he said. I am not doubting myself, she replied softly. I am doubting what we are. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, We are an agreement that keeps getting harder to define. She laughed bitterly. That is one way to say it. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the city. Finally, he said, Lena, the night I asked you to sign that contract, I told myself it was just business. But lately, I am not sure where business ends and something else begins. Her heart skipped. Alexander? But before she could finish, his phone buzzed again, and his expression changed. It is urgent, he muttered, stepping aside to answer. His voice turned cold, all warmth erased. She caught fragments. Board meeting, vote, deadline, and felt the distance return like a wall. When he hung up, his gaze was distant. I have to fly to Zurich in the morning, he said. It is complicated. So are we, she whispered, but he was already walking away. The next day, he was gone before sunrise, and the penthouse felt like a museum again. Days turned into weeks with only brief calls, polite check-ins that felt more like business than care. Yet every night, Lena sat by the window with her sketchbook, drawing his face from memory, the curve of his jaw, the tired eyes that hid too much. One evening, she found a message slipped under her door. No signature. Just one line in that familiar, sharp handwriting. 30 days left. Are we still pretending? Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. She did not know the answer, and for the first time, she was terrified to find out. The days after Alexander's message moved like slow thunder across the city. Lena tried to focus on her art, on her mother's recovery, on anything that would distract her from counting the hours until he returned. But every corner of the penthouse carried his presence, the faint scent of his cologne on the jacket left over the chair, the empty cup he never rinsed, the steady hum of the elevator she half expected to open at any second. When he finally came back from Zurich, it was unannounced. The elevator doors slid open one evening, and there he was, exhausted but sharper, his eyes darker than she remembered. You are home, she said quietly, unsure if she should smile or not. If you can call it that, he murmured, setting down his suitcase. The air between them trembled with unspoken things. She wanted to ask if he missed her, but instead she said, Dinner is in the oven. He paused, then nodded. You waited for me. You signed me up for it, remember? 90 days? Her words were meant to sound light, but they came out brittle. After dinner, he poured 2 glasses of wine. The city outside glowed like liquid gold. The board voted, he said finally. They wanted to remove me as CEO. She stared at him. Did they? No, he replied, because you were there. Your presence changed everything. They saw stability. They saw humanity. Lena frowned. So this worked. The contract did its job. That is not what I meant, he said quickly. But she was already standing. Yes, it is. You do not have to explain. He caught her wrist, his voice low. Lena, listen. This stopped being about a contract a long time ago. Her pulse stuttered. Then what is it now? He hesitated. Something I do not know how to name. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then his hand slid away, as if afraid to break something fragile. The following week, their picture appeared on the cover of a magazine, Alexander Reed and his mysterious wife, the couple everyone wanted to be. But behind the perfection, something inside both of them was unraveling. One evening, while Alexander was in a meeting, Lena's phone buzzed. An unknown number sent her a photo, a scanned page of their marriage contract, stamped and signed. The caption beneath it read, "Everyone will know the truth soon." Her stomach turned to ice. Panic clawed up her chest as she called Alexander, but he did not answer. Within hours, the media began to buzz. "Fake marriage scandal," the headlines screamed. Cameras gathered outside the building, flashes lighting up the lobby. When Alexander finally came home, his jaw was tight. "Who sent it?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Someone from inside the company," he said. "Eric Vaughn, most likely. He has been waiting to destroy me." "Destroy you?" she snapped. "This destroys me. Do you realize what people will say?" He took a step closer. "Lena, look at me. You have done nothing wrong." "I lied to the world," she said, "and maybe to myself." Her voice broke. "This was supposed to be pretend, remember? I agreed to play the part, not to fall for it." "Lena," he began, but she shook her head, tears rising. "Do not. Please. If you still see me as part of your image, then just say so. But do not make me believe this was something real." Before he could speak, she grabbed her coat and walked out, pushing past the flashes and shouts outside. Rain had started to fall, soft but relentless, soaking through her clothes. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed air. Behind her, through the glass, Alexander stood still, watching her disappear into the storm. For the first time, he felt what it meant to lose something not written in any contract. As the city swallowed her figure, the 90 days were almost over. But the story between them had just begun. For 2 days, Lena stayed away from the penthouse. She turned off her phone, hid her wedding ring in her pocket, and wandered the streets like a ghost among strangers. News vans still parked near the Reed building, their bright lights flashing headlines about betrayal and deceit. Every time she passed a store window, her reflection looked less like herself and more like a rumor. On the third morning, she found herself in the same small cafe where she had once applied for a job months ago. The waitress recognized her from the magazines, but said nothing. She just poured the coffee, warm and silent. Lena wrapped her hands around the cup, staring at the steam curling upward. It felt strange, sitting there without security guards, without designer dresses, without his name. For the first time in weeks, she could hear her own thoughts. Somewhere across the city, Alexander sat alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and silence. His assistant hovered at the door. "Sir, the board is demanding a statement. They are calling it a scandal." "It is not a scandal," he said, his voice steady but cold. "It is my fault." He dismissed the assistant and turned to the window. Below, the city pulsed, indifferent to his empire, indifferent to his pain. On the desk lay the contract that had started it all, creased, stained with a drop of wine from their first dinner, and now useless. He stared at the signature at the bottom, her name written in graceful ink, the mark of a woman who had trusted him when she should not have. That evening, a call came from his lawyer confirming what he already knew. Eric Vaughn leaked it. He wanted the stock to crash before the next merger vote. Alexander hung up without a word. The anger he felt was not about business. It was about Lena. She had walked away believing he had used her. And maybe, in the beginning, he had. But not anymore. The next morning, Lena returned to her mother's hospital. The nurses smiled warmly, unaware of the storm outside. Her mother was stronger now, her eyes bright despite the tubes and machines. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you look tired. Are you and Alexander all right?" Lena forced a smile. "We are just figuring things out." Her mother reached out, squeezing her hand. Love is not about contracts. It is about choosing someone even when it hurts. Those words echoed in her chest as she left the hospital. That same afternoon, Alexander held a press conference in the Reed Tower lobby. Cameras lined the marble floor, and every journalist waited for his defense. Instead, he stepped to the podium, his voice calm but raw. "The reports are true," he began. "Our marriage began as a contract. But somewhere between the lies and the signatures, I found something I did not expect. Someone who reminded me what it means to be human. This was my mistake, not hers. Lena Hart is not a liar. She is the most honest person I have ever known." The room buzzed, flashes burst, but he stepped away without taking questions. Within an hour, his confession was everywhere. Lena saw it on a cafe television, sound muted but his image clear. His eyes looked tired but sincere. The barista turned up the volume just as his final words played. "If love was ever real in this, it was hers, not mine. But I hope someday she can forgive me." Lena's throat tightened. Without thinking, she left the cafe, the untouched coffee cooling behind her. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale and open. She took a deep breath, then another, and whispered to herself, "Maybe it is not too late." At that moment, Alexander was in his office, staring at a photograph on his desk. Her smile caught mid-laugh, a memory from their trip to the countryside. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then dialed. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered softly. "Alexander?" He closed his eyes, relief washing over him like sunlight after a storm. "Lena," he said quietly, "I am sorry." And for the first time, he meant every word. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the city filled the space between their breaths. Lena held the phone to her ear, listening to the hesitation in his voice, the same quiet she had once mistaken for arrogance. "Alexander," she said softly, "why did you do it?" His answer came after a pause. "Because I was tired of living behind contracts. You deserve the truth, even if it cost me everything." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You already lost everything, Alexander. You lost me." He did not argue. He just said, "Then let me earn you back." The next day, the headlines shifted. Investors called his confession reckless. The board threatened his removal again, and yet Alexander did not flinch. He had spent years building walls of glass and power. But now, for the first time, he let them break. Meanwhile, Lena returned to her art. Her sketches grew darker, more alive. One of them, an unfinished portrait of Alexander, seemed to follow her across the room whenever she tried to ignore it. A week later, an invitation arrived at her door. It was a letter, written in his familiar handwriting. "There is a charity auction this Friday. One last event before I step down. I hope you will come, even if only to see how the story ends." She almost threw it away, but something inside her refused to. When Friday came, she stood outside the Reed Tower again, heart pounding. The cameras were gone, the noise replaced by soft music drifting through the lobby. Inside, the room was smaller than usual, intimate. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of hope, of struggle, of love, and in the center, one caught her breath. It was hers. The city sketch she had once left on the table weeks ago, framed and titled 90 Days. The crowd whispered as Alexander stepped onto the small stage. He looked different, less polished, more human. "Tonight," he said, "we auction a collection that means more to me than profit. These works remind us that beauty comes from imperfection. The first piece," he gestured toward her sketch, "is from an artist who taught me that truth can live inside mistakes." His eyes met hers across the room. The air seemed to still. Lena wanted to run, but her feet would not move. As the bidding began, he interrupted, saying, "Actually, this one is not for sale. It already belongs to someone." The crowd murmured. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. I should have told you sooner, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I kept it because it reminded me of you, how you saw light even when everything felt broken. Her throat tightened. Why are you doing this in front of everyone? Because for once, I want the world to see what I almost lost. His voice trembled slightly, the first crack in his perfect composure. Lena, I cannot rewrite the past, but I can start being honest about the future. I do not care about titles, about money, about what they think. I just want you. She shook her head, fighting tears. Alexander, this is not about forgiveness. You cannot just erase the hurt. I know, he said. That is why I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance. The room was silent, waiting. Lena looked at the painting again, then at the man who had once been a stranger behind a contract. The truth was, she had already forgiven him long before this night. She had just been afraid to admit it. Slowly, she stepped forward. You said 90 days, she whispered. We are past that now. Then maybe we start counting differently, he said, a small, unsteady smile breaking through. For the first time, there were no lies between them. No signatures. No rules. Only two people standing in the middle of a crowded room. Finally real. The applause came quietly, like rain after a storm, but neither of them heard it. They were too busy holding on to the one thing that had never been written into the contract: love. The night of the auction ended quietly, but the echo of what had happened lingered in every corner of Lena's mind. She and Alexander left through a side exit, away from the noise and the cameras. Outside, the city breathed with soft neon light, and for the first time in a long while, it felt peaceful. They walked without speaking, the rhythm of their steps matching the faint hum of traffic below. When they reached the car, Alexander stopped. I know I cannot undo the pain I caused, he said, his voice low, steady. But I meant every word I said tonight. Lena looked at him, uncertain. What happens now? He gave a quiet, almost uncertain smile. Now, I let you decide. She studied his face. The same man who once treated life like a negotiation, and realized there was no arrogance left in him, only truth. You really are stepping down? She asked softly. Yes, he said. I sold my shares this morning. The company will survive without me. I want something different now, something that feels real. She frowned slightly. You are giving up everything you built. No, he corrected. I am keeping the only thing that matters, if you will let me. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent, but not cold. When they stepped inside, the place felt different, lighter. He walked toward the bookshelf and pulled out a familiar folder, their contract. It was creased, worn, and held together by a paperclip. 90 days, he said quietly. That was the rule. She nodded slowly. And today? He handed her a pen. You tell me. She looked at him, then down at the papers that had once defined their lives. The lines, the clauses, the conditions, all meaningless now. What if I do not sign anything this time? She asked. Then it will be the first deal in my life, based purely on trust. He set a lighter beside the folder. Without another word, Lena picked it up, flicked the flame to life, and touched it to the corner of the contract. The paper curled, darkened, and turned to ash in seconds. Alexander watched, saying nothing, his jaw tightening as if each burning page erased a piece of his old self. When the fire was gone, only silence remained. She looked up at him. So what now, Mr. Reed? He smiled softly. Now, we start over. No contracts, no conditions. Just us. She took a slow step forward until she was close enough to feel his breath. That sounds risky. It is, he admitted. But the best things usually are. For a long moment, they stood there, the glow from the fireplace, painting them both in shades of gold. Then, without hesitation, he reached for her hand. You once told me you draw to help yourself breathe, he said. You taught me that love can do the same thing. She smiled, eyes glistening. So what do we do with all this freedom? He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. We use it to build something that lasts longer than 90 days. The next morning, news spread that Alexander Reed had officially resigned from Reed Dynamics, donating his shares to a foundation supporting young artists and community hospitals. Reporters speculated endlessly, but for once, he refused every interview. He and Lena moved quietly into a smaller apartment overlooking the park where she often sketched. No chauffeurs, no assistants, no contracts, just sunlight, coffee, and the sound of pencils scratching across paper. One afternoon, as she painted near the window, Alexander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. You know, he said softly, people think I gave up my empire for you. She turned to face him, smiling. And did you? No, he said. I just finally learned what an empire really is. She tilted her head. And what is that? Waking up next to the person you would sign your name to every day without needing paper. He kissed her forehead, and she laughed quietly, whispering, Looks like you finally broke your own rule. He smiled, eyes warm. Yes, he said, and I would break it again, every day, for you. 1 year later, the city looked different. Or maybe it was Lena, who had changed. The mornings no longer felt rushed, and the sky outside their small apartment seemed softer somehow. The world was quieter now, but full of meaning. She stood by the window with a mug of coffee, her sketchbook open on the table beside her. Pages of new drawings filled it, portraits of faces from the foundation, children painting under sunlight, doctors and patients laughing together, and in the final pages, Alexander. He was not the man in a suit anymore. He was the man who smiled while planting trees in the park, who painted walls in community centers, who laughed when she accidentally got paint on his shirt. Behind her, the sound of footsteps and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. You are awake early again, he said, setting a cup beside hers. You have been awake even earlier, she teased, pointing at the smudge of paint on his sleeve. He laughed, shaking his head. The volunteers started at dawn. I could not sleep anyway. We are finishing the last wing of the art center today. She smiled, the kind of smile that came from quiet pride. You really built it. We built it, he corrected gently. You were the reason it began. That afternoon, they drove to the new building, a bright, open space filled with color and life. A banner hung across the entrance. The Heart and Reed Foundation for Hope. People gathered outside, friends, artists, doctors, and families. The press was there too, but this time, the attention felt different. It was not about scandal or wealth. It was about what they had created together. When Alexander stepped up to speak, he looked nothing like the man who once lived behind glass walls and contracts. A year ago, he began, I thought success was about control. I thought love was a weakness. Then I met someone who proved me wrong. He looked toward Lena, his voice steady but full. She showed me that the strongest kind of love is the one that asks for nothing in return. This foundation is dedicated to that kind of love, the kind that rebuilds lives quietly, one person at a time. The audience applauded, some wiping tears. Lena felt her throat tighten as she joined him on stage. Do you remember the first contract we signed? She whispered. He chuckled softly. I remember burning it. Good, she said, smiling. Because this one is different. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only one sentence. This is not a contract. It is a promise. His expression softened as he read it. What promise? He asked quietly. That I am staying, she said simply. No more countdowns. The crowd erupted in applause as he pulled her close. Cameras flashed, but they did not notice. The world blurred into light and sound. Later that night, back in their apartment, the city lights shimmered through the curtains. Lena sat on the floor, sketching as Alexander poured wine. On the table lay the framed copy of her old drawing, 90 Days, hanging beside a new one titled Forever After. He handed her a glass and sat beside her. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asked. She nodded. "A contract, a mistake, a test, but also a beginning." "Would you change any of it?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "Not a single thing," she said. "Every wrong turn led me here." He took her hand and kissed it gently. "Then I guess we found the right ending." Outside, the city hummed softly, the same city where a billionaire once lost everything and found something greater. Their story had started with ink on paper, but it ended in something no document could capture: two people who learned that love was never meant to be signed, only lived. And as the lights flickered across the skyline, Lena whispered the words that had once changed her life. 90 days were never enough. Alexander smiled, pulling her close. "Good," he said, "because this time there is no end date.